After Dark, My Sweet, Chapter 5. Faye Anderson had given me about $30 when I left her place, and I'd had around 3 of my own. But now I had a little less than 5. I don't know what had happened to the rest of it, whether I jerked it out of my pocket and lost it, or whether someone had gotten it away from me in that lunchroom. But that little bit, around $5, was all I had left. It was almost worse than having nothing. I couldn't really travel anywhere on it. It wasn't more than enough to live on a day or so. A few days before, $5 would have looked pretty good to me. But I'd kind of changed since then. I didn't see how I could go back to living like I had. Knocking around and getting knocked around. Sleeping in culverts and begging for handouts, and bumming rides to places I didn't actually care about going to. As Uncle Bud said, that was bad, really bad. When I thought about it, certain other things didn't look so bad at all. I used 15 cents of my money for a crosstown bus fare. I got off at the highway, the one that led past her place, and well, for a while I just loafed around there. I sat on the bus stop bench, and I got an ice cream cone from a peddler, and I window shopped the neighborhood stores. It was hard to decide what to do. I always have trouble making decisions, and this was a particularly hard one. I paced back and forth in front of the store windows, arguing with myself, fumbling with that little bit of money I had in my pockets. I certainly didn't want to put Faye on the spot, more or less force her to go ahead with something she was against. On the other hand, she was already on a pretty bad spot, wasn't she? She couldn't go on like that, any more than I could go on like this. And it would be good to see her again. So I could just stop by for a visit, couldn't I? I wouldn't need to stay. It was when I was looking in a liquor store window that I finally made up my mind. There was a big curved neck bottle inside, just wine, but it looked mighty fancy, and the price was only $3.98. I figured it would make a nice present for her. I could take that out to her, and it would give me a reason for stopping by. I bought it. Then I stepped out on the highway and started thumbing. No one would stop for me, but finally a truck came by slow enough so I could hop on the tailgate. It was pretty rough riding there, and the day was another scorcher. I kept jouncing up and down, and of course the wine did too, and I imagine it got a lot hotter than I did. We came to the little lane that led up to her house. I swung off the truck running, and that final jouncing was just a little bit more than the wine could handle. The bottle exploded. It blew up right in my arms. There must have been a gallon of that sticky red wine, and I'll bet every drop of it went on me. I hated to call on Faye looking that way, but I didn't have any choice. I had to get washed up and do something about my clothes, and her house was the only place I could. It was early in the afternoon when I got there. She'd only been up a couple of hours, so she hadn't had too much to drink. Quite a lot for the average person, I suppose, but not for Faye. It was just enough to put her in a good mood. "Oh, Collie, you crazy, silly, sweet," she threw her arms around me, laughing. "What in the world happened to you, baby?" "Well, I just happened to be in the neighborhood. I thought I'd bring you a little present, a little wine." "A barrel, darling? Were you rolling it across?" She laughed uproariously. "Across the highway and through the trees to Grandma's house?" She laughed and laughed, kind of crying along with it. She pushed me into a chair and sat down on my lap. And I tried to tell her she'd get all messy, but she didn't even seem to hear me. "I'm glad you came back, Collie," she whispered. "I wish you hadn't. I prayed that you wouldn't, Collie, but I'm glad. I'm glad too. I didn't mean to, but it just seemed like I had to. After I met you and everything, I just couldn't take that old concrete pasture anymore." The what?" "The concrete pasture. I mean, that's what it seems like to me. You keep going, and it's always the same everywhere. Wherever you've been, wherever you go, everywhere you look, just greyness and hardness, as far as you can see." I know what you mean." She shivered and kissed me. "But this other, it seems like there should be some other way. I guess there probably is. There's probably lots of ways, but no one's ever pointed them out to me, and I've never been able to find them myself." "Poor Collie. Have you had a hard time these last few days, darling? Where have you been?" "Nowhere, just fooling around. I took a bath and put on some clothes she gave me. We had lunch and then we talked some more. At first she said we'd find another way out. There was bound to be another way and we'd find it. When Uncle Bud showed up, we'd toss him out on his ear. But she was drinking while she was talking, and she kept tossing the booze down. So it wasn't long before the good mood was gone, and she'd completely reversed herself. "Collie, the Wonder Soup Hound, why don't you dig us up some bones, boy? Dig us a cave to live in." "You shouldn't say things like that, Faye. I know you don't mean it." "There in the bar that day, you thought you were hooking into a soft touch, didn't you? You thought you could take me for everything I had. Well, you can, so why don't you? Take the damned car and the damned house, and see what you can do with them. Of course, you'll have to pay off a couple of little mortgages first." "Maybe I could," I said. "I mean, maybe if we had a little money and I could get some kind of a job." "You jerk! You imbecile! What kind of job could you hold? Hunting sand in the Sahara?" A blinding pain stabbed through my forehead. I said that if that was the way she felt about me, I'd better clear out. "Well, why the hell don't you?" she yelled. "Do it and stop talking about it." She staggered into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I got up and went out to the back porch, and then, after a minute or two, I started down the lane toward the highway. It was the best thing to do, I figured, the only thing to do, because if she acted this way now, when she didn't know there was really anything wrong with me, how would she act if she knew the truth? A lot of normal people are scared to death of anyone with mental trouble, and with those booze-shot nerves of hers, she was a long ways from being normal. Probably she wouldn't say anything, do anything openly. She'd be too scared. But she wouldn't want any part of me. She wouldn't, and Uncle Bud wouldn't. And yet, if I was tied up with them in a kidnapping, if I knew something about them that might send them to the chair, well, you see what I mean. They'd feel that they had to get rid of me. They might not like to do it, at least Faye might not, but they'd think that they had to, and they would. Anyway, that's the way things looked to me just then. I was almost to the highway when Uncle Bud's car turned into the lane. He came to a quick stop and leaned out. I gave him a grunt and a nod and kept on going. "Wait a minute, kid." He jumped out and caught me by the arm. This is a way to treat a pal, kid? I've been lying awake nights worrying about you and hoping you'd come back, and then the minute I see you—" "I'm in a hurry," I cut him off. "I just stopped at the house to tell Faye goodbye, and now I'm on my way again." "No, you're not, kid," he said firmly. "I ain't letting you pass up a deal as sweet as this. You hop right in the car, and whatever's bothering you, You ain't sore at me, are you? I didn't hurt your feelings with that little joke I made about sleeping by yourself." He looked up at me anxiously, his face all friendly concern. I said that it hadn't sounded like much of a joke to me. "So I wasn't thinking," he said. He laughed uncomfortably. "Maybe it wasn't a joke. Maybe I don't like the idea of another guy making time with Faye when I've never even been able to get to first base." "Well, I wasn't trying anything like that." "Sure you weren't, but if you do try to, kid, if you want to and she wants to, you'll never hear another peep out of me. I need you too much. Know what I mean? I've been looking for a guy like you for months, and now that I've found you, I think you'd better count me out. I don't seem to get along too well with Faye." Ah, sure you do. He clapped me on the back. She was needling you, huh? Well, don't you mind her at all, because she don't mean a thing in the world by it. But there's something else, I hesitated. Something about me. So you've had a little trouble, he shrugged. Who the hell hasn't? Now pile into the car and forget this stuff about clearing out. I knew it was all wrong. He had to have me, so he was willing to forget about Faye for a while. But as soon as he was through with me, or if something made him decide that I wasn't any use to him, it was all wrong any way you looked at it. Faye in the shape she was in, and me in my condition, and Uncle Bud feeling like he did about me, and the kidnapping itself. Kidnapping, the dirtiest kind of crime there is. Still, it was either this or nothing, the way things looked to me. It was either this or the old concrete pasture. So I got into the car and with him and went back to the house. I wanted to believe that things would turn out all right, so I went back, and inside of an hour I was back up on top of the world again. Everything was fine. Everything was going to be finer. Uncle Bud knew it, and he made me know it. He didn't try to kid me that the job wouldn't be dangerous, but once it was pulled, we'd be safe, and we were a cinch for the dough. We'd be able to duck the traps that kidnappers are usually caught in. We'd know about them in advance, whether the ransom bills were marked or registered, or whether there was a police stakeout at the payoff place. Uncle Bud still had all kinds of contacts inside the department. He'd know every move that was being made before it was made, so there might be traps, but they wouldn't catch anyone. We'd get the money, $250,000, and we'd get away with it. We didn't discuss the actual kidnapping that evening. Uncle Bud said we'd take that up after I got settled down a bit. I didn't argue with him. I was feeling good. Whatever there was to worry about, and I guess there was probably plenty, I didn't want to face up to it just then. Faye waked up. She got to feeling fairly good again, and the three of us went out to the garage apartment. We dusted it out, put clean sheets on the bed, and so on. Then we went back to the house, and after a while Faye began to razz me a little. But she was more funny about it than mean, so I didn't really mind. Uncle Bud left around 10 o'clock, or I should say he started to. He was telling me good night, shaking hands with me, when he turned suddenly and looked out the window. "Somebody's coming. Get that light off. Get out of sight, kid. Faye." Faye hurried to the window and looked out. She stood there a moment, peering through the glass. I heard a car door slam. "You'd better go into the bedroom, Collie. Take your glass with you. But it's all right for Uncle Bud to stay." She turned around. "It's only Bert." "Bert!" Uncle Bud turned white. "You mean that character from the Roadhouse? Hell, if he sees me. What's the difference? He can't tie you in with anything. He's threatened to kill me. We were in on a deal together, and he thinks—" He broke off frantically, snatching up his glass. "Don't let on I'm here, understand? There ain't no one here but you." "But your car, what'll I tell him?" "He doesn't know my car when he sees it. Tell him it broke down on the highway and the people pushed it in here for the night." I was already in her bedroom. He beat me in after it, leaving the door cracked open a little. He was really scared. I couldn't hear him panting in the darkness, hear the nervous rattle of papers in his pockets. Whatever he'd pulled on Bert, it must have been pretty raw. Bert only came in as far as the kitchen, so we couldn't hear everything that was said, but from what we could hear, it sounded like a purely social call. Faye was a good customer of his. She hadn't been to his place for several days, and he'd wanted to see if she was all right. He left after a few minutes. Uncle Bud followed me out of the bedroom, wiping the sweat from his face. "Boy," he said shakily, "was that a close one?" Said Faye. "So it would seem. Just what kind of swindle did you work on him, anyway?" Nothing, Uncle Bud shook his head fretfully. "Bert's just plain unreasonable, know what I mean? You try to explain something to him, show him exactly why a proposition went wrong and why it isn't your fault, and he won't even listen. He just holds his hand out and tells you to come across. Faye yawned and sat down again. She looked at me, that mean sparkle coming into her eyes. Well, Collie, what do you think of our head man, the genius who's going to lead us to safety from rags to riches? A truly great mind, wouldn't you say? Of course, it may get him killed, but at least he did manage to swindle a barkeep. Uncle Bud laughed and gave me a nudge. He said I wasn't to pay Faye any mind, because she was just the world's greatest little kidder. But look, Faye, he added, it ain't going to do for that character to be dropping by here. If it should happen later on after we... Forget it, Faye snapped. That was Bert's first visit here in months, and I'll see that it's his last. I've got a strong stomach, but one bird like you is about all I can take. Uncle Bud laughed again. He was after something, you see, and he wasn't going to let himself be insulted until he'd got it. He left a few minutes later. Faye and I talked for a while longer after he'd gone, or I should say, I tried to talk to her, because I didn't have much luck at it. She'd slugged down 4 or 5 drinks in a row, so that killed any chance of really talking. Why do I ride Uncle Bud? She said. Why does one ride a jackass? Because it's the shortest distance between 2 points. Quod erat demonstrandum, which translated into canine means, look, Faye, this is important. If you think he can't pull this off, or that he might try to pull something on me, will you stop interrupting? It means never look for bones in a bottle. You remember that, Collie. It's the secret of my success. Good night. I got up and started for the garage. I was just about to the back door when she yelled, Collie, and followed me out to the kitchen. I don't know, honey, she said, putting her arms around me. There's something insidious about the guy. He sort of takes you over and makes you over, and it's hard not to like him. But the things he's pulled on people. And as for this present deal, a man who would dream up a thing like this, Collie, he's considerably less than upright. But if it would make him anything, and if he thought he could get away with it, he'd double-cross anyone. But you don't see how he could. You just razz him to see him squirm like you do me. Something like that. When a person can't stand herself, Collie, when she loathes herself. It'll be all right, I said. Everything will be all right afterwards. Will it? Do you really think any good can come from it? It's got to, Faye. It's got to come from somewhere. We stood there close together, her arms tightly around me. She squirmed contentedly, and her robe opened a little. She had nothing on underneath. Faye bent her knees a little, sliding her warm flesh against me. She took a long, shivery breath. The sweet softness of her breasts seemed suddenly to harden. Then she waited. All I had to do was make one little move, and somehow I couldn't make it. With any other dame, yes, but not with her. She meant too much to me. This had to mean more than it could now. After a moment, Faye looked up at me, eyes twinkling, a soft smile on her face. Well, Collie, is this part of your college training? Not to take advantage of a lady in her cups? I don't know. I felt rather embarrassed and foolish. I mean, well, I never really went to college. Just some night classes when I didn't have to work. So? She stood on tiptoe and kissed me, gave me a pat on the cheek. Well, it's an excellent argument for the midnight oil. Look, I don't want you to think I wouldn't like to. Also for abstinence. Go to bed, my friend. Yes, I really want you to. We have a nice thing here, and let us not louse it up. She kissed me again and gave me a push toward the door. I went to bed.